Hi, this is Peter Godinez, your ambassador with K80Y TV, with another series of Meet the Candidate. And we have the lovely pleasure of getting a chance to interview Tom Figg. And as I said, that's spelled with 2 G's, so I'm sure there's some significance to that. Great times two, that's what I heard.
I like it. Can I use that?
You can certainly go with that. And so, Tom, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule and allowing us to get to know you. And that's what we're going to try to do. And just let the city of Port Hueneme and everybody beyond get to know the real you.
Great.
So, my first question is, in the beginning, where did this all start with Tom? Born, raised?
I'm a Northern California born and raised boy. Grew up in Sacramento. Was born in Sacramento. Came from a typical boomer family, very common, normal, suburban type life. Maybe a little unusual in that my dad was a school administrator, a teacher, was a principal of high schools and junior high schools. So I lived a little bit in a more of a rigid, kind of a disciplined environment where the parents had a high expectation of all of us, my brother and my sister. A B average wasn't acceptable. If I did something wrong at school, my mom would know it before I got home because of the network within the school administration. So but there was also a high expectation. There was never a question of would we go to college, it was where we would go to college. So we were always prepped of improving ourselves throughout our lives. Somewhere in the middle of my high school years, I developed an affection to architecture and did a lot of drafting. Back then we didn't have electronic CAD programs. It was, hand drawing on a board sort of thing.
Late nighters too.
Oh, and lots of those. That then set the stage. I received a couple of scholarship awards, and that allowed me to go to Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, which is...
Oh my goodness, you and I both then.
Great.
We'll talk afterwards.
Yeah.
Okay, we got a lot to talk about. Mustangs.
Mustangs, there you go. Well, the school today is probably even more difficult to get into. It was an impacted program, which means that I really wasn't able to get into my core studies until my second year. So I ended up having a year that I had to just kind of keep myself occupied. During that time, I began to broaden my interest from just building to planning, to looking at how to improve communities on a much grander scale than individual projects. So I broadened my horizons within the School of Architecture into urban planning. Okay. So I graduate in 1975 in the middle of a recession. It was very difficult to find work. I learned of a job opportunity in Port Hueneme. At that time, being a Northern California boy, I thought everything south of Santa Barbara was Los Angeles. So I got dumb lucky, came down here, got lost, but finally found my way to my interview and was fortunate enough to get the job. I didn't realize how fortunate at the time I was, because I ended up having an opportunity that very few college graduates get, and that is to take your book learning and actually hit the ground running. In the case of Port Hueneme, it was a community that was in need of rebuilding itself. And so I took all my philosophies and land use know-how and applied it immediately to rebuilding a community. For 20 years for the city, I had that privilege of working in a team that did some incredible things, rebuilding the beach south of Hueneme Road, just changing the complexion of the community from a Navy town to a beach community, and had the time of my life. Very few graduates get that opportunity, and what I've learned in my years since is that so many of the kids today have a really myopic view of the world. They get a certain discipline and they don't get a broad exposure to the world. And in my case, planning, I find that, for instance, UC Santa Barbara, they have an environmental planning program. The kids get a pretty narrow view of how it works, how the system works together. And by that I mean that you need to bring the resources available to you. You need developers, you need financing, you need collaboration with your community stakeholders, to make it all happen. And a lot of kids don't get that kind of exposure. They usually come into a job in a regulatory kind of mindset. And I learned early on that you can use land use regulations to either facilitate or frustrate an outcome. And I had the good fortune of doing the opposite, of using those regulations to realize the community's vision. And it was just a rare opportunity, and it was, in hindsight, kind of both a blessing and a curse. Because after I moved on, I don't have as much tolerance for incompetence, political dysfunction, because I saw how it can really work when everybody's on the same page and the marvelous things that can happen. I have not witnessed that in my years since. So after my 20-year stint with the city, I grew restless. I saw there was a great opportunity in the city of Ventura to redevelop their downtown, and I was recruited for that opportunity. So it was tough leaving the city, but I had to move, I need to continue to grow. Turned out that there wasn't a really good fit between me and the political landscape in Ventura. And after 18 months, I decided life's too short. I think I've got more to offer than to be caught up in this kind of drama. I want to do things. And so at that point, I stepped out of the public sector, set up my own shop, and I've been doing consulting now for the last 15 years for public and private entities. Redevelopment continues to be a line share of my work, but I also advise developers on permitting process and helping to really problem solve. That's really, my kids, to this day, they ask, Dad, what do you do? You're an urban planner. What the hell does that mean? Well, the long and short of it is, I'm a problem solver. I try to make things happen. And I use all of my education and the experience that I've had in my life to bring them to fix things. And that's really getting to a conclusion here, is what brought me to wanting to run for the city of Hueneme. I've got 39 years invested as a resident. I've got 20 years of my career invested in making this a better place. And it's time for me to give back. I'm troubled by a lot of things that I see, and I think that the experience and the tool chest that I bring, and the perspective, the historical perspective of knowing where the bodies are buried, that I think I can help problem solve for the city. So
I think it's excellent. I think going back to your Cal Poly years, the theme of learn by doing was something you just explained. That's about as ideal as it gets. Although, what did you say, dumb luck, which I haven't heard in a
Dumb
while.
luck.
Sometimes, I guess my best mentors have said, rather be lucky than good. But no, I guess the next thing on my mind is just hung around some celebrity clientele back then. Weird Al Yankovic was in your department that same year. I graduated in '81.
I didn't know that.
We'll talk later. So, just with all that, I mean, community-wise, you have children. Are they mini you? Are they as obedient as you were in Sacramento?
Well, I mean,
talk to me. Is it okay if you talk
absolutely.
about that?
I have a very interesting, eclectic kind of family.
I've
been married married more than once.
Okay.
I have a couple of children that are challenged children, but they're great. And I don't want them to replicate who I am. They need to be their own person.
Okay.
But I'm instilling the same sense of values that I grew up with. There is no question about going to college. It's when and where. And yet at the same time, I'm nothing like my old man, who was a disciplinarian.
I was going to ask you about that.
Oh gosh, I could tell
Different
you stories.
segment, huh?
I could have put him in prison by now if I had grown up in the environment today.
Right.
He was a disciplinarian. I'm a heck of a lot more relaxed, and I think that's true of a lot of baby boomers. You know,
You think it's best of both worlds for your kids? A little bit of a
well,
disciplinarian,
you need to give them guidance, but you don't want to smother them. And I would like to think we're successful, probably more because of my wife than me.
Of course.
But one of the things that made me think about running for office was also to set an example. A little bit of a civics lesson and giving back. And so that you can be proud of your old man and realize that you're part of the problem if you don't participate in the solution. And so I hope that carries over to them. But they're their own people, and they're great kids. And so I hope that I've contributed to their enrichment, but they've still got a ways to go yet. And they'll continue to need the old man's advice, and hopefully I'll give them good advice.
We got to throw this old man stuff out because you and I are in the same category.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did I offend you?
No, I easily offend myself. No, I just think what your life is just such a testimony to what's needed in this culture. And that's why I asked about your kids. And hopefully when you say challenge, you don't be a grade student like I was. So I was just kidding about that. But let me ask you this. In the event you do get elected, what would be some of your priorities? Can I get your point on that one?
I have, as you may have seen in my website, I mean, I've got a pretty ambitious agenda of things that I'd like to accomplish. But I think that the overarching theme is that we need to rebuild relations with our stakeholders. One of the things that made us successful when I worked for the city and redeveloping the community was having partnerships with the Navy, having partnerships with the Harbor District, having partnerships with the Hueneme School District. We did a lot of great things together. And somewhere, somehow along the way, we've kind of lost that spirit. And it shortchanges what the city can do by not involving those stakeholders in the problem-solving process. So I would say that's my overarching thing, is we gotta rebuild those community relations. Now we hear words like transparency and that kind of thing. Okay, but the reality is we've offended our partners. And I'm sure it wasn't intentional, but things like revenue sharing disputes with the Harbor District and threats of litigation, and then misrepresenting the Admiral on Measure M and failing to consult them in advance of Measure M's placement on the ballot measure, and then the withdrawing of the crossing guards from the school district. And then finally, coming on the immediate horizon is the possibility of kicking out the Boys and Girls Club from the Athletic Center. These are partnerships that have always been the legacy of Port Hueneme, and we're squandering those relationships. So that's my overarching theme. Now, as you saw on my website, there are a host of things I want to look at. Water rates, which the grand jury took exception with the city of Port Hueneme. Increases in all of our utility rates, sewer and refuse. We have a structural budget deficit between the revenues coming in and the cost of providing services, and it's projected to increase over time. So we definitely have challenges. And sand erosion, I made a big appeal not long ago at the city council about, you talk about, and rightfully so, you're giving credit to our congressional reps that have helped to bring forward dollars to rebuild our beach. But the reality is we spent $2 million of our own funds that should not have been spent. The city had the tools to monitor sand replenishment operations, dredging operations, and they failed to do so. So all of a sudden now we have a crisis. That crisis should never have happened. So I could go on and on and on, but there's a lot of those kinds of issues that I want to tackle. And because I have some perspective, for instance, with the Harbor District, I drafted 3 of the revenue sharing agreements that are now in place and are supposedly in the middle of a dispute. So I can bring a perspective that maybe other people don't have because I put those together. So I understand how they work. I participated in the drafting of the sand replenishment legislation back in 1996 that this city has failed to exercise. So, and I'm trying to keep positive in my campaign. Sometimes it sounds like I'm personal, but I'm disappointed that these things have happened. And I know that we have a council that's well-meaning, but I think it's time that there needs to be a fresh look, a new approach, and that's what I bring.
I tell you what, there's your website I mentioned. It's easy to find. And Tom Figg with 2 G's.
Can't get a whole lot easier than that.
That's great times 2 with 2 G's. Again, and find it. And so there's a lot of content about you. But now we have a visual portion of it on KADY TV. Tom, much success. I appreciate you being on the show.
Very much. I appreciate the opportunity.
Nice to know you, and nice to know our Cal Poly graduates.
There you go.
All
We'll
right.
talk later.
We'll do.